Welcome to Crossroads. The non-governmental organizations who are the middlemen of the mass migration movement right here into the United States, they're about to lose a whole lot of money from the federal government. Also, meanwhile, the problem of mass fraud among the Somali community in Minnesota is getting a lot more light. And as it gets more exposure, well, there are growing accusations against local officials. And this could be actually kind of a testing ground for what could happen in other states where local officials are doing similar things. Also, on another topic, President Donald Trump has new plans for Argentina, and I would say this is about restoring the Monroe Doctrine. I'll be talking about these topics a lot more today. Make sure to hit the like button, and let's get started. All right, first of all, non-governmental organizations are about to lose a whole lot of money from the federal government. Secretary of State Marco Rubio explained the tax dollars meant for foreign aid, like USAID and a lot of other programs, basically, instead of going to like the countries or whatever else, they're instead being used to basically prop up NGOs. The NGOs just eat up a whole bunch of money and give very little at the end of the whole train. And many of the NGOs have gotten involved in various programs, including the facilitation of mass illegal immigration right here in the United States. Now, this is Marco Rubio explaining the new U.S. policy on foreign aid during a singing on December 4th. Watch.
The United States has spent billions of dollars over the years in helping with health strategies all across the world. What we learned over time, and especially after coming here, is that oftentimes, and I'm oversimplifying it, but this is an accurate description, what would happen is we would go to a country and say, we're going to help you with your health care needs. Then we would drive over to Northern Virginia somewhere, find an NGO, one of these organizations, give them all the money, tell them go to this country and do their healthcare program for them. That NGO would then take about some percentage of that money for their overhead and administrative costs. And by the time it got down to it, the host country had very little influence. It was sort of imposed on them. And only a percentage of the overall money ever actually reached the patients and the people on the ground that we were trying to help because of these costs. This makes no sense. So why are we hiring American and international NGOs to go into other countries and run healthcare systems that are parallel and sometimes in conflict with the healthcare systems of the host country? If we're trying to help countries, help the country. Don't help the NGO to go in and find a new line of business. And so that's what the model that we're breaking. We're not doing this anymore. We are not going to spend billions of dollars funding the NGO industrial complex while close and important partners like Kenya either have no role to play or have very little influence over how healthcare money is being spent. Bottom line is, if you want to help a country, work with that country, not work with a third party that imposes things on that country.
So the NGOs have been funding themselves on aid money meant for other countries, basically. And the countries they're intended for have just been getting a fraction of it. Anybody who's worked in this space knows, and this is not all of them, but there are a lot of NGOs and nonprofits, and when it comes to the actual money and actual actions they do on the ground, for the initiatives they claim that they act for, typically it's a very, very, very small fraction. The majority of their money goes to overhead and things like that. And the problem is, a lot of these organizations are deeply politically involved as well. Even more than that, many of these organizations work as a kind of hand-in-glove program where government, through public-private partnerships, can use them to do things they constitutionally or legally cannot do themselves. When the government cannot do something legally, they make a contract with an NGO, the NGO carries it out for them. We saw this with mass censorship. We saw it, for example, with the facilitation of mass illegal immigration. We've seen this over and over again. And this has kind of created a non-government form of government that has been able to extend itself into ways that are maybe even not legal if the government itself were to just do it. Not only that, but many of these are globalist organizations, not acting in the interests of the United States, instead acting in foreign interest or personal interest or crony interest within different factions within this country. And this is a big deal also because, look, what else is happening here? As I mentioned, the NGOs have effectively been the hand or the glove that the hand has gone in for the mass migration crisis, not only here but also in Europe and Canada and other countries. Now, Stephen Miller, the The White House Deputy Chief of Staff for Policy and Homeland Security Advisor, during an appearance on Fox News on Ingram's Angle, said this. Watch.
President Trump has blown the lid off of the refugee industrial complex. And the way this works is exactly the way that you said. The U.S. government historically, and this of course got taken to the highest degree ever under Biden, hands out billions, with the B, billions of dollars in grants to these third-party groups, non-governmental organizations, to work with the Department of State to find the poorest populations from the most dysfunctional places in the world and then bring them into small-town America. They typically look for areas in rural communities, rural places, or more traditional Midwestern towns that they can completely transform. So they send them to small towns in Ohio, to small towns in Maine, and of course we've seen their central project has been in Minneapolis and St. Paul, in the Twin Cities in Minnesota. And so these nonprofits get massively rich. They rake in a fortune. They become some of the wealthiest nonprofits the world has ever seen. And their job is to fly the refugees here, to help them become citizens, and to ensure that they are enrolled in every welfare benefit program imaginable.
The gravy train. That's
all of it at the expense of the American people. Exactly. It is heinous, it is shameful, and I'm proud of the fact, which we don't say enough, President Trump has stopped all refugee resettlement into the country. The only refugee resettlement that is happening are the Afrikaners being persecuted in South Africa.
So are you getting that? Basically, your tax dollars have been giving billions of dollars to these NGOs, which have basically been given an open slate to remake the fabric of this country. They can send illegals or migrants to any part of the country, swing states, a lot of it has gone to swing states. They can basically pour people in, pour money in, pour welfare programs in. There's almost no public oversight. In fact, if a journalist were to go to many of these migrant hotels, the guards, like the private security, threaten them. It's happened many times, actually. I can tell you I have personally investigated this. Many of you have seen my documentaries or features on this. For example, my documentary, Weapons of Mass Migration, where me and some colleagues went down to Panama and investigated exactly what is happening. And basically, this is what's happening. The United States is part of an international program with the United Nations called the Global Compact for Safe, Orderly, and Regular Migration. That program is the agreement to run the mass migration programs. And the way it works is this. Your tax dollars go to the United Nations and to various NGOs within the country. The United Nations part of it is typically run through the State Department. The United Nations then, under organizations such as the IOM, International Organization for Migration, then contracts various NGOs. And the NGOs, alongside the UN directly within these countries, and I went down there to the camps. They have UN booths, they register people, there's all kinds of NGOs there. In fact, then if you go to like the United Nations camp, also tons of these organizations. If you've seen my documentary, you know that I knocked on their doors, I talked to some of them. They're very shady and they don't like being talked to. But what they do, they pay these, they give your money through UN, then to the NGOs. The NGOs basically facilitate all of this, and effectively it's just a giant bus program. They register people at United Nations booths, they get them signed up for all these different programs, they load them up on buses, they send them north, they keep doing that. Some countries, that includes cartels. Nicaragua, for example, they have to work through gangs. And then at the US-Mexico border, they also have to work through the cartels. The cartels and gangs are actually part of the process that is facilitating this. Once they get to the US-Mexico border, they cross the Rio Grande, they turn themselves in. This was under the Biden administration. It's gone now under Trump. I actually went there. It's totally gone now. I went just, I believe, last year, actually, to show you all this. They turn themselves in, and the way it worked was that when they're arrested, you know, quote unquote, they say, hey, I want to apply for refugee status, I'm impoverished, or I come from this country. In reality, if you go to the Mexico side, they've been discarding their identities. The ground is literally covered with discarded IDs, discarded passports, discarded airplane tickets, discarded bus tickets. and discarded pamphlets for the Mexican government and the United Nations, which was helping, again, run this whole operation. They do that to defraud the United States because they're trying to get rid of their identities. They come across the border, they turn themselves in, then they have to get sent to what are called processing facilities. These were facilities run in part by Customs Border Protection and through Homeland Security. They then register them, do biometrics, get them involved in these things. They then grant them parole. Once they're on parole, they can get welfare. Then they hand them off to NGOs. The NGOs then control the buses within the United States, paid for by your tax dollars as well. And then they bus them to various parts. Hey, we need more migrants here, more migrants there. They bus them in, and then they have a massive welfare complex using your tax dollars to house them, to feed them, to give them free cars, to give them free health care. Your tax dollars hard at work. And these NGOs have basically been making billions off of this. The NGOs have gotten stinking rich off of this, and your tax dollars have paid for it. This is a program that, whether it's the intent or not, has radically altered the political makeup of the United States, radically altered the census data of the United States, radically altered political representation through House seats in the United States, and is radically remaking the country, and will even more so within 2 generations. It's a very big deal that they're actually cutting this off now. The NGOs have been given massive, massive power within this country. And so we'll see what happens now that the State Department and the Trump administration is now saying, rather than use NGOs for proxies, they're going to go directly. The power of these organizations is not just through things like this, it's through a lot of things. This is just, the mass migration thing is just one little part of the entire picture. It's one little part of it. This is a massive complex. Now, meanwhile, the problem of mass fraud among the Somali community in Minnesota is getting a lot more light. And as it gets more exposure, there are growing accusations against local officials, which is a very big deal. This is Fox News, The Will Cain Show. Watch this.
Under the nose of Ilhan Omar, Tim Walz, Attorney General Keith Ellison. We see a web of connections between them and those directly involved in the fraud. For example, Ilhan Omar alleged enabling introducing the 2020 Meals Act, which was ultimately subject to fraud. Held a campaign victory party at the Safari restaurant. That's where one of the men who run that restaurant has associations to the convicted individuals. And then there's Tim Walz, House Oversight Investigation role in his role as governor. Or Keith Ellison, the Attorney General. His job is to enforce the law in Minnesota, but instead he's getting donations after meeting with the Feeding Our Future representatives.
Now, this is a very big deal. This is a big deal that goes beyond Minnesota. This is a big deal that could impact basically every state in the country and a whole lot of local officials because of the way this is being framed. Let me explain. What is interesting here is the method by which these local officials are being tied to this fraud. Now, under normal circumstances, if you're a local official and you pass an act that people then, use and commit fraud with, it doesn't necessarily mean you're responsible for people taking advantage of it, right? Normally not so. And if you're meeting with representatives from a humanitarian group or an NGO wrapped up in facilitation of this or a scandal, doesn't necessarily mean you're involved with that scandal. It's just kind of the way that, the American system works, actually. We have a lot of private organizations and government officials and local officials have to go through them for donations or representation and things like this. In other words, you wouldn't normally consider this to be scandalous, but here's why it matters. I say this matters for a reason totally different from what a lot of these organizations are saying. Basically, this is what's happening. There is widespread fraud in the illegal immigrant community across the entire country. People are getting welfare who should not be getting welfare. People are getting commercial driver's licenses who should not be getting them. In New York, they found that about half of the commercial driver's licenses are being given illegally. In many states, they find even crime stats being rewritten, covering up things illegally. You have issues where local officials are getting people basically just free slates. Hey, You're an illegal immigrant. We don't want to see you deported. We're going to reduce your crime, reduce your charge so you're not deported. We're not going to cooperate with the federal government on deportations for rapists and murderers and people who drink and drive and kill people. And that's the way it's been done. What is interesting here is this is being framed as a type of collusion. In Minnesota, that same type of action is being framed as a type of conspiracy. People acting as a type of racketeering, right? That these local officials are basically part of a racket to protect the criminal activities of an illegal population that is basically abusing the American people. That's how the narrative is being framed there. What's important is that is happening in just about every city and every state across the country to some extent. What you're watching is not a Minnesota problem. What you're watching is not just a Somali community problem. This is the way this is being operated across the entire country. And these local officials who've been part of it, whether they have passed laws to protect people committing fraud, whether they've passed laws, for example, protecting people violating American law, whether they've done things to cover up for crimes, whether they've done things to guard people against deportations, whether they've done things to, for example, make sure that fraud is being committed, getting illegal commercial driver's licenses, defrauding the Obamacare system, programs to make it so they don't check the migration status of people applying for social welfare, thereby robbing the American people. People, for example, making it so that laws and data on voting information are not passed to the federal government as it relates to people illegally registering to vote. All of that could be framed with the exact same narrative you're watching in Minnesota. And if you were to take my opinion on it, maybe Minnesota is being used as the kind of testing ground for that kind of scandal and that kind of criminal charge. Basically, again, this is racketeering. The way it's being framed is RICO, that local officials clearing the way, local officials saying, hey, turned a blind eye to it, local officials allowing crime to be committed, and even barring punishment against people, and even going after people who try to expose it. That is them being involved in a criminal racket. That is the way the narrative is being formed. And that is being done in many parts of this country. Cities, states, local communities, all across the United States. That's why this matters so much. Case in point also, right? This is even tying in with illegal aliens in Minnesota getting taxpayer-funded health care benefits. It turns out in Minnesota, they're getting about $107 million. And why does that matter? It's not even just about the Somali community. They're talking about illegal aliens around the entire state. Again, the narrative is expanding beyond just the Somalis. The Somalis are kind of being used as the beachhead for this narrative. It's not limited to them. Already it's expanding beyond them in terms of the narrative. And again, the focus on Minnesota, right now, people pay attention to it. This problem is not limited to Minnesota. This is a problem throughout the entire country. Now, we'll see if they actually go after people. We'll see if people face criminal charges. But if they do, the model used in Minnesota could be used elsewhere. And look, alongside this, the Department of Justice is also now suing several states for refusing to provide data on voter rolls. Interesting, right? AP News said this: the U.S. Department of Justice is suing 4 more states as part of its effort to collect detailed voting data and other election information across the country. It says the department filed federal lawsuits against Colorado, Hawaii, Massachusetts, and Nevada on Thursday for, quote, failing to produce statewide voter registration lists upon request. It says so far, 18 states have been sued, along with Fulton County in Georgia, which was sued for records related to the 2020 election, and which also froze the election and had the Biden bump, that vertical spike in votes, because they just happened to find a lot of Biden votes and no Trump votes. Now, it says the administration has characterized the lawsuit as part of an effort to ensure the security of elections, and the Justice Department says the states are violating federal law by refusing to provide the voter lists and information about ineligible voters. Why would they not do that? Why is it just these states? Good questions, right? It says the lawsuits have raised concerns among some Democratic officials and others who question exactly how the data will be used and whether the department will follow privacy laws to protect the information. For their part, that's the narrative they're basically using. They're saying constitutionally, the federal government cannot do illegal searches and seizures. They say this is an illegal search and seizure, and it relates to the transferring of personal identifiable information between government departments, something they say cannot be done. In other words, comparing voter registration rolls with things like social security numbers and things like that. Some of the data sought, it says, includes names, date of birth, residential addresses, driver's licenses, and social security numbers of these various individuals. And basically, the federal government is now looking to see, were illegal aliens being allowed to register to vote? Were they voting? And if they were, well, again, was there a criminal racket in place to protect fraudulent votes? Interesting, right? Now, look, also on this, on the issue of fraud in the Social Security system, this could be a big deal as well, because guess what? It came out recently that just in terms of what's even known, regardless of states blocking this information, close to 4 million non-citizens have received Social Security numbers that they should not have gotten with very little vetting under the Biden administration. And that does not even include the potential rate of fraudulent or stolen Social Security numbers. Suggesting, again, the amount of fraud that is taking place is just astronomical. It could be just through the roof. Now, look, on another topic, President Trump has new plans for Argentina. A lot going on here. We'll go into this, though, after we come back from a quick break. So, hey.
All right, just a pause here for a super quick moment. You are, of course, watching Crossroads with Joshua Philipp. I'm just here to share a message about American Hartford Gold, my own personal gold and silver bullion dealer. Now, obviously, the recent tariffs have made the markets super turbulent and volatile. With every new piece of tariff news, the markets seem to either crash up or crash down. And of course, it's worth mentioning that these conditions don't only affect Wall Street. They affect all of us through our investments and our retirement accounts. That's why I'd like to introduce you to a company that I trust and I myself use to secure my own savings, American Hartford Gold. They specialize in helping Americans move our assets into something tangible, into something you can actually hold, which is physical gold and physical silver, two precious metals that act as a hedge against all those decisions being made in Washington, D.C. They have an A+ rating with the Better Business Bureau. They have thousands of 5-star reviews, and they make the whole buying process super simple. Your metals can be shipped directly to your door, or you can transfer your current retirement account to a tax-advantaged gold IRA. And the best part is that right now, American Hartford Gold is offering an exclusive offer. When you call them today and you mention the name Joshua, you could receive up to $15,000 in free silver with your initial investment. Take advantage of their special offer. You can either just call them at 877-260-2764 or text Joshua to 65532. All their information will also be down in the description box below. And now, back to Crossroads.
Welcome back. There are big things taking place in South America, Central America, and Mexico, because President Donald Trump is doing something interesting. They're now planning to bring back the Monroe Doctrine. What does that mean? It means good old American justice, good old American economy, and good old American friends and allies are coming back to Latin America. One of the big pieces of this is, of course, Venezuela, but another one is Argentina, which could actually soon be coming up, let's say. Hot Air said this: President Donald Trump and Argentinian President Javier Milei have a special relationship. It says each is engaged in a crusade to make the respective country's economy great again. Trump was all in on helping Milei win his election earlier this year, and he's now offered the Argentines a $20 billion lifeline as they adjust to the bumpy path to needed free market reforms. Now, I know a lot of people have asked this. Why the heck are we giving $20 billion to Argentina? Why are we giving money to some random country? The simple answer is this, at least in my interpretation. Trump needs allies. What's happening right now is the United States is working to restore the Monroe Doctrine. What is the Monroe Doctrine? This is a policy of the United States, written, not really enacted in law, but basically practiced since the early-ish 1800s. It basically said, no more European colonies in the Americas. No more European colonies in Canada, no more European colonies in Central America or South America or the Caribbean. No more of that. If you're not part of this region, stay out of it. That was used, of course, during the Cold War and the Cuban Missile Crisis. Hey, Russia, stay out of Latin America. That has been used to basically keep the Chinese Communist Party out of Latin America. But that all began changing under Hugo Chavez in Venezuela. Chavez, working alongside Fidel Castro post-Soviet Union collapse, established various international organizations between countries mainly in Latin America. And what they did is they formed inter-country unions that excluded the United States and Canada and worked to openly, in their own words, push out the Monroe Doctrine. No more U.S. involvement. After they pushed out the United States, they then began bringing in the Chinese Communist Party, Iran, which, as you've seen, they've been doing all these oil shipments and business things, and Russia. And so Russia, Iran, and China have effectively come to dominate a lot of Latin America. Many countries got swept up in debt traps. In fact, the CCP's program for debt traps, the Belt and Road Initiative, the testing ground for that, one of the big ones, the pilot programs, were in Venezuela. And so what has effectively been done is America, the United States, has been pushed out of Latin America. We've basically let it happen for a long time. Trump is saying no more. What does that mean now? It means that now that they've declared it's in the National Security Act they have right now, and it's also being declared openly through the Department of War, right? Or Department of Defense as it used to be called. The Trump program is to build up economies, bring American law enforcement, build up factories, build up new forms of, trade and so on. In other words, bring wealth and legitimate business back to countries in Latin America. And to the countries that do not play ball with us, the cartel, regimes and so on, the countries where the government basically is a drug cartel like Venezuela, and I'm not going to name names, there's quite a few of them. Those countries are being told, play ball or it's game over. We're gonna stop the drug trade. Your illicit economy is gonna die. And if you don't want to go down with it, start building a legitimate economy. What you're seeing right now is Trump is actually working with several countries to build legitimate economies. Again, Bukele in El Salvador, Trump ally. We have law enforcement cooperation. You will probably watch that expand. Malay in Argentina, Trump is pouring money in to make Argentina kind of the new Paris of the South, so to speak. They're going to become one of the top economies if this program works. And from there, they're probably going to become the model which other countries can look to say, hey, I want that for my country as well. Or they're going to be met with the opposite, which is where Trump is saying, hey, Venezuela, your government is run by the cartel of the Suns, and guess what? We're going to kill all of them. That's what Trump is saying right now. So you have two options, right? Pick your poison. Which one? Do you want the red pill or the blue pill? Pick your poison. This is the way it's going right now. You're going to be watching the United States with the reinforcement of the Monroe Doctrine, building up powerful friendly states and utterly destroying hostile states. That is what you see right now unfolding. And look, alongside this, right, to this point, alongside Argentina and the building up of a friendly state that's probably going to have a very, very successful economy, the Monroe Doctrine, the restoration of this, could also see non-friendly states get decimated, and this is going to look like regime change in some places, like Venezuela. In fact, it's public now. CBS News said this: Venezuelan opposition leader, this is Maria Corina Machado, said she's absolutely supportive of President Trump's strategy in the country amid its administration's increased pressure campaign against the regime of President Nicolas Maduro. Why does this matter? If Maduro is eliminated or runs away with a helicopter full of money or something like that, there's already an alternative government that is friendly towards the United States, ready to take control of Venezuela. What does that mean? It means the post-Maduro Venezuela will look like Argentina, a friendly U.S. ally, because they have a government in waiting, effectively, as soon as Maduro and his cronies are pushed out. And she said this, quote, "We, the Venezuelan people, are very grateful to him, Trump, and to his administration, because I believe he is a champion of freedom in this hemisphere," Mercado said of Mr. Trump on Face the Nation with Margaret Brennan. It says last week the Venezuelan opposition leader made a daring escape from her country to collect her Nobel Peace Prize in Norway, meaning international support for this opposition leader. It says the appearance marked the first time Mercado has been seen in public in almost a year after living in hiding in Venezuela. In an exclusive interview with Face the Nation, meaning, again, in my interpretation, bipartisan support within the American political system, Mercado said she dedicated the award to Mr. Trump because, quote, he finally has put Venezuela where it should be in terms of a priority for the United States national security. And she said, "We have been asking for this for years, so it's finally happening. That's why I believe the regime has its days numbered," meaning regime change, meaning friendly government in waiting, meaning bipartisan support, meaning semi-international support. To this point also, Venezuela is important because Venezuela was the beachhead to push the United States out of Latin America. That was mainly, again, run by Chavez working in cahoots with Fidel Castro in Cuba. And you're going to watch that entire power dynamic flip because they're basically like, they're kind of the keystone in this whole thing. You pull that out, the whole thing comes crumbling down. If they're eliminated from the equation, right, the Venezuelan regime, and a friendly government is planted towards the United States, which already has basically popular support because of the elections in 2018, meaning this would not be like some attempt of regime change in like Iraq or something like that. You will watch this have a rippling effect throughout Latin America, and very likely a shifting of interest, let's say, of working more closely with the United States. Now, look, in all the other news also, free speech online has been heavily dismantled, in case you haven't noticed. But there are a few exceptions of this, like X, and even they face huge amounts of pressure for allowing free speech, where the European Union is trying to shut them down or take control of them. That's the newest. And the federal government is trying to step in to do something about it. The FTC right now, the Federal Trade Commission, they're actually doing something about it. And this could potentially see free speech make a broader comeback. This is J.D. Spura. It says this. On February 20, 2025, the Federal Trade Commission initiated a public inquiry regarding whether any technology platforms, including social media, communications, and other internet service providers, get this, have violated the law by censoring, banning, or otherwise penalizing platform users based on their speech, actions, or affiliations. Short answer, yes, they have violated this. I've experienced it personally. To this day, I am still demonetized on YouTube for, again, saying true things during the COVID pandemic and reporting accurately on January 6th and reporting accurately on Spygate. I've been censored for telling you the truth. They censored me for telling you the truth. And that is the cost of being honest these days in an extremely dishonest and puppeteered media landscape. So they're going after him now, which I think is a great thing. But it says this. As part of the FTC's inquiry, individuals and companies can submit comments regarding their experience of platform moderation decisions via regulations.gov by May 21st, 2025. It says the FTC is specifically encouraging people to discuss the circumstances under which platforms have denied them access to services, whether the platforms had content moderation policies, whether users had the ability to challenge adverse actions taken by the platform against them. Notably, to this day, YouTube has not even told us why we're censored. They won't even give us the reason, by the way. They've never told us. They said it's one channel within our network violated their terms. They won't even tell us what that term was. Facebook went after my documentary on COVID origins, actually even citing a former employee of the Wuhan Institute of Virology, and used the narrative, get this, they said there could not have been a virus leak from the Wuhan Institute of Virology because security at that facility in China was just too dang good. They used that to fact check me and to send every person who shared that documentary, told them they shared fake information. Everything I reported at the time has since been proven true. I have not had to issue any corrections on it. And it turns out the other side has gotten a lot of things false. Again, people who report accurate information are punished. That's the way the system has worked. And the federal government now under Trump is stepping in to change that. They're also going to be asking how adverse actions affected them, the motivations of the platforms, and whether the actions of the platforms affected competition or were made possible by a lack of competition, which I've been saying is the big piece, because what has this resulted in? It has resulted in anti-competitive behavior. Major media organizations run their quote-unquote fact checkers, right? They go and do hit pieces on their financial competitors. The hit pieces are then used by the platforms to censor people, demonetize people, kick people off. And again, what these major media organizations have done by extension is use a falsified narrative, pushing false narratives, accusing their competitors of disinformation and otherwise, to shut down competition and create a media monopoly. A media monopoly using anti-competitive behavior. The, quote-unquote disinformation industrial complex, I would call it. The cooperation of pseudo-legal or illegal government censorship, hand-in-glove techniques, where they were advising people, hey, censor this, censor that. International interest, meaning this is an international crime, telling platforms to do this. Businesses, major media organizations and their corporate owners, then using this type of censorship as a way to destroy media competition. And then platforms that have basically been part of this, and advertiser networks that are also part of this, and banks that have debanked people, also part of this, used as a massive form of anti-competitive behavior that has eliminated a good chunk of free speech, and notably been used to skew the entire information landscape politically, meaning it favors one side of the political aisle and has basically deplatformed the other side. This is political manipulation. This is, I would say, voter interference. This is anti-constitutional censorship. And I would say this is racketeering as it relates to anti-competitive behavior. I don't know if the federal government's going to take it this seriously, but in my own interpretation, this is what has been happening in the United States with the censorship industrial complex. Now it says here as well, as of February 28, 2025, more than 1,000 individual comments had been received. Now it also says the FTC did not refer to any specific laws that may have been violated, but wrote in a press release that it seeks to determine whether certain content moderation practices constitute, quote, potentially unfair or deceptive acts or practices or potentially unfair methods of competition. Why does this also matter? As I mentioned previously, when Trump was giving his campaign promises, he suggested that we could see RICO charges on this. Again, that there is a racket that has been involved in anti-competitive behavior. It also notes the FTC also wrote that the actions taken by tech platforms, like these big media companies or social media giants, quote, may harm consumers, affect competition, result from a lack of competition, or be the product of anti-competitive behavior, meaning committed crimes. We will see if anything happens, but it is interesting at the very least they're now looking into it and they're talking about it publicly. That said, questions, comments, anything you want to talk about, leave it in the chat. Let's jump into some questions. All right, first off, let's see here. E. Frago, you're saying, instead of refugee industrial complex, the more accurate term is human trafficking. I think you're right. Yeah, I mean, it's complicated, actually. Okay, you want to get into like possibilities in terms of criminal charges. I don't know if they'll do this because it would criminalize probably too much. This is one thing I've come to learn as an investigative journalist I've been an investigative journalist since 2008. What is that, 16, 17 years? I've been on the front lines of this for a very long time. One of the harshest realizations I've come to, which I believe I can share publicly, is this. There are some forms of criminality that are allowed to take place because the consequences, the damage to the world and society would be too large if they did something about it. It represents too many people, it represents too many organizations, and it represents too large of a chunk of the existing social order than they would ever want to effectively uproot. Typically, they do go after things like this, but it does not involve the entire system. Typically, what you have are fall guys. So instead of going after, a huge number of employees and officials and organizations and nonprofits and local organizations and community activists and everything else that have in fact been involved in what I would consider to be human trafficking, they would likely instead go after a handful of public figures or heads of organizations. Maybe instead of going after, the billions of dollars given to these organizations to facilitate it, every government official who allowed that, who facilitated it, who is knowingly part of it, every international organization part of it, every policy that allowed it, every individual in their communications who knowingly did this, which they openly communicated. There are written records of this. I've read them. And every international organization has been part of this, facilitating what is now declared by the Trump administration as a existential threat to Western civilization and a human rights abuse, mass migration. They will likely not do that. I don't think they'll go after it because you would see a huge number of elected officials go to jail. You would see effectively every foot soldier of these NGO systems go to jail. You would see a huge number of local officials go to jail. You would see a huge number of massive NGOs get dismantled and basically be deemed human trafficking organizations and crumple. You would see a huge number of gangs, a huge number of local policies, a huge number of local community organizations, community organizers, food houses and so on receiving this money. Anybody who was knowingly involved in effectively a giant criminal racket, you would see them all get taken down and thrown in prison for human trafficking. That will never happen, all right? I don't think that will ever happen. The consequences of it would be too large. It would effectively work as a way of criminalizing or incriminating a good chunk of part of our political spectrum. Who knows the effect it would have in terms of social impression? How would the American voter view that? And to what extent could they even go after criminal organizations? It would be a big thing. What I think would happen is this instead. If they were to even go after it, which I do not think they will in that capacity, even though I think legally they could make a case for it, even if they were to do it, you would only see this. A handful of the leaders of organizations or people involved with the money, like, the guy working in the financial department who is, in charge of this, or people who openly communicated and directly facilitated it, only those people would go to jail. And what you would have instead is effectively people being given, free slates. Hey, testify and you get no charges. The same way they go after a mafia, the same way they take down organized crime. People get plea deals. Okay, we know you were involved, foot soldier. Testify against this guy, you won't go to prison. At most, you would see that. And I think that even if they could use this to take out, just clean house effectively, you would not see that. But you might see a handful of criminal charges. You might see a handful. And that's just the way things work. I'm not saying this is a bad thing. I'm not saying it's a good thing. It's just the way things work, and it's something I've come to realize as a journalist for a very long time. And it is just the way the system works. It's just the way the system works, right? For better or for worse. James Dyson is saying, Josh, what is your take on Chinese billionaires using the holes of the U.S. Constitution to flood America with mega families? I see what you did there, James. You're saying, through the illicit support of nannies, students, workers that penetrate government. The Chinese honeypots. James, what am I going to do with you? Anyway, thank you, James. Okay, so this is what's been happening. Actually, I'm glad you mentioned this because I wanted to talk about this. Actually, I just forgot to actually. So it turns out you have Chinese billionaires using like women, like harems, and they're having anchor babies, like dozens of them in the United States. So they're basically, you have Chinese billionaires who've been paying women to be like their mistresses or whatever, and they're having just tons of kids in America. And like, why are they doing that? Meaning they just have like tons of American citizen anchor babies when they're Chinese citizens, and they're doing it here. I mean, why are they doing that? I can tell you a few assumptions I have, okay? Okay, so first of all, what is one of the greatest ironies of many head CCP members? Almost all of their children go to school in America, okay? Like, they go to school it's like Harvard and Yale and stuff like that. Like a lot of the Chinese students are your CCP leadership kids. They come here with a ton of money. They spend a lot of money. The schools like them because of that. Look, to be honest, even Trump is allowing that. Trump said, well, you know, the schools wouldn't be able to a lot of schools would go out of business without Chinese money. Why is it Chinese money? In a country where about 600 million people live on about $140 a month, right? What does that tell you? It's not most of the Chinese people. It's not most of the Chinese people. It's literally just the children of like Communist Party members, like high-ranking Communist Party members. That's about it. The big money in China is all that. Now, if you want to immigrate to the United States and you're a member of the CCP, what prevents you from immigrating? Let's say hypothetically the Chinese Communist Party collapses. Let's say hypothetically you want to get money out of China. Let me explain a couple parts of this because this is really important, okay? The problem you're going to have if you're a member of the Chinese Communist Party is when you try to migrate, there's a question on the migration forms. Are you or have you ever been a member of a communist party? And if you're a literal, card-carrying, have to pay fees to it, and have to join literal study sessions of communist texts because you're a card-carrying member, documented of the Chinese Communist Party, you're going to have a very hard time migrating to the United States because if you answer yes on that, and a lot of them defraud that, by the way, you can't come to America. Or unless you're like a dissident or something like that, like you've turned against the CCP, or you quit, maybe if you quit the party, which a lot of them have, then you can come here, maybe. That is a very big wall for a lot of these CCP members, right? And so basically, if you're wealthy in China, you have to be a member of the Chinese Communist Party. There's just a threshold, even past a certain point of profit within a business, every member of the company, every employee has to join the Chinese Communist Party. It's how the system works. If you're going to go to college, if you're a student, you're not going to have a chance unless you join the Youth League or the Young Pioneers, the Communist Youth League or the Communist Young Pioneers. There's no other option. And so if you're not a member of the CCP, you're going to be one of those peasants. You're a factory worker, you're a peasant in the field, you're making $140 a week or a month, and you're a peasant. All the money coming here is CCP members, right? Because that's the way communism always works. Once they get past the whole carrot and the stick phase of, hey, vote for me and I'll make your life better. I'll make all your wildest dreams come true. The money just goes to the party and the cronies of the party. Now, why would a member of the CCP want that? Two reasons. One of them is they want to launder money, or they want to get money out of China. Now, what are the big problems you have with getting money out of China? Well, there are certain laws that make it difficult for members of the Chinese Communist Party to pour money or buy businesses or invest or whatever else in America. It's a little complicated. But if you give money to your children and then your children do that, it's less complicated. So a Communist Party member or leader can give insane amounts of money to their children. It doesn't have to be gifts. It can be a shared bank account. And the child, who is now an American citizen, thank you, anchor baby laws, that child, or dozens of children in this case, because they're again using, basically women just taking their kids, whatever you call it, whether you call it like, I don't know, mistresses or women who are just kind of having babies on their behalf, right? It's part of a system. So the kids then get access to the money. The kids can then buy a business. The kids can then buy real estate. The kids, using the shared bank account, shared money of the CCP member, can buy things here, and it's no longer called China buying a business. It's no longer called China buying up real estate. It's no longer called China making business deals or investing or doing whatever else. Instead, it's called an American citizen doing normal things. That's why. And so it works on a few different grounds. Now, part of that is used for personal gain. A lot of these Communist Party members are trying to get money out of China because they know the Chinese economy is it's basically a giant Ponzi scheme. They lie about their GDP every year. They know the whole thing is a house of cards, and they know it's going to collapse. They want to get their money out of China. The problem they have is the CCP restricts foreign investment. All foreign investment past a certain threshold is regulated, controlled by the CCP. They also have the problem of the digital yuan, the digital currency, the yuan. It's a little different if it's your kid and you're giving money to your kid, and your kid happens to go to school in America. See what I mean? The other big thing is they can use these kids for United Front operations. And that also helps clear their name in China, because instead of saying, hey, I'm getting money out of the economy because I know it's a big joke, they can tell the Communist Party of China, hey, my kid is doing the work of the party in America. My kid is doing the work of the party in Canada. My kid is doing the work of the party in Africa or Latin America or Western Europe or wherever else. And so the kids become the leaders of the United Front. The kids become part of this front line where they serve both sides. They serve the interest of the individuals doing things for their own personal benefit, and they serve the interests of the Chinese Communist Party, working as the frontline foot soldiers of the CCP in the United States under the guise of American citizenship because they've been defrauding the American system. That is what's going on. That is what you're watching. And I know this because I've been investigating it since 2008. I've been investigating the United Front since 2008. In fact, I was, in English at least, I think the first journalist, to ever report on it. In fact, some of the first U.S. government reports were based heavily on my writings. I've done on-the-ground investigations into this. They threatened to kill me for years for reporting it. So I understand the system very, very well. And I will say this is one of the greatest threats to the United States. In fact, I would say this is the greatest threat to the United States, the United Front Work Department, and the way this whole thing works. Denise B., you're saying, Josh, someone in the chat yesterday pointed out that in Washington and New York, those illegals given CDLs, commercial driver's licenses, may also have been automatically registered to vote as part of getting that driver's license. That would be interesting. Is it different with CDLs? So I do know in New York and New Jersey and or California, right? Now, look, I'm from California originally. I mostly lived in Jersey, but I lived in New York for a long time. I know that if you go to register, if you go to the DMV and you get a driver's license, there's a little question-answer thing. Do you want to register to vote? Are you an American citizen? Right? Or just, are you registered to vote? And hey, or do you want to register to vote? And hey, if you're not an American citizen, you can't, right? Basically. It's very easy to lie on that. It's literally a box. And if you're not an American citizen, you could easily say, well, I misread it. Oops, sorry, I registered to vote. Because it's just a box and there's basically no oversight on it in many places. That is the way normal driver's licenses work. Now, is this different for CDLs, commercial driver's licenses? I don't actually know. If any of you in the chat know, let me know, because I'm curious now too, and I think I will look into this, because that would be a very big deal. That'd be a very big deal. All right, everyone. That said, I've been going a bit longer today, so I do apologize on the first part of the chat. Let me know in the chat, what do you think? I mean, first of all, do you know anything about these CDLs? I'm curious what you all know about it. I will look more into this because I want to know as well. Let me know what you think about all this. Agree with me, disagree? Do you have other opinions? Do you think I'm missing something? Tell me in the chat. That said, join me again tomorrow for more great content. There's always a lot to talk about, and I will see you all then. In the meantime, please don't forget to like and share. And also, please take care of yourselves, stay informed, and stay free. Thank you.